we go.
There you go. That looks fine.
There you
Got it now.
Alrighty. Well, let's be off and running. The Freedom Committee of Orange County, passing the torch of liberty on to future generations through personal military history presentations. And so here's the Freedom Committee's, one of their handouts that they have in there. And we were young and eager to serve. And you guys will see some change in that over time. Each one of us has had that situation. So at one time I was a young man, 1959, and the young lady with me is now my wife of 55 years, so she never really got out of the car. And so I was young and pretty free and ready to go, and the next thing you know, here we are talking about my Vietnam experiences. This was a document that I received from General Stilwell when I first came into the country in June of 1964, and our mission is to provide U.S. Army support to the people of South Vietnam in their fight against a ruthless communist enemy. The word ruthless is not a strong enough word for what the communist enemy did to those people before, during, and after we were involved. I was on off-flight status for a couple of months after an accident, and I was a liaison officer to a Vietnamese military group that was near Bien Hoa, near Saigon. And two of the officers that were Vietnamese that I worked with both spoke English. Both had learned their English in Catholic schools in North Vietnam. And they had both fled with their families and joined the South's army so that they could fight against that ruthless enemy. This was the MAC V symbol that we all wore on our right sleeves. This was my battalion, the 145th Aviation Battalion, which eventually became the training battalion for all aviation in the Army last time I read. This was our company, the 118th Aviation Company, and this strange-looking bird here is actually supposed to be a thunderbird. There was a book called The Thunderbird Lounge, and it was all about the history of the 33rd Aviation Company that came to Vietnam and how they got their name, which eventually turned into the 118th. Well, this is, and you'll see this several times in the presentation, this is, for our purposes, the highly recognizable Thunderbird. We had three platoons. We had 1st Platoon, they were called the Scorpions, doing B-model Hueys. And then this was the 2nd Platoon, the Choppers, which was the group that I was in the whole time of my service there. And then this was the 3rd Platoon, the Bandits, which of course, as you can see, they were our gun platoon, and the guys who, I think they had more fun than we did because they could shoot back. So I'd have to tell you a little bit about normal operations for an aviation company. We're all, all we did was fly. Well, we partied a little, but one of the things that we did was we had specific formations that we dealt with. And so here you can see V's of 3. This is the Alpha group, 1, 2, and 3. The Bravo group, 1, 2, and 3. The Charlie group, 2, 3. Quite often we would go in with 9 aircraft, and then behind that would be another 9 aircraft from another We also did some really large assaults and such. We would have we'd have 5 aircraft in each one of those flights. And that meant that we were going into a large physical landing zone. This other stuff could have been really small, but it was more or less the usual size. And this was trail. This was when you're actually following each aircraft one at a time. It looks like this. As you can see, this guy's following this guy, following this guy, and following this guy. Well, one of the times, let's pretend like I'm flying in this aircraft. And this guy ahead of me, I can see his tail. And normally, the tails kind of wiggle in thumpy, sort of irregular movements because of the wind the turbulence that's in the sky when you're flying behind a bunch of other helicopters. But in this particular day, this tail was doing this. It was sliding around in short, snappy little vibrations. Well, one of the pilots was Sam McLarney. He was in a class behind me, and this was Jerry McKelvey. Those two guys were flying that aircraft. And when we got out, I went over and pushed on the tail boom of their aircraft. What I want to show you here is this line is how the tail boom and the main body are hooked together. And so basically what that looks like is, this is the black one is the tail boom, and this silver thing is a collar, and this silver thing is a collar for the main body, and so that's the red hand side. Now these two collars are connected to each other, and it kind of looks like this. If you peer in, you'll see where the rivets would have been to connect this collar to that collar. And when I pushed on that tail boom, what I saw is a separation of the collar for the tail boom. And it's just a matter of time before that kind of a failure in the metal would have caused that tail boom to be totally unstable, probably fall off, and everybody in the aircraft would be goners. And so I really felt, and still do, is that why I was paying attention and why that added up at that particular time, I'll never know, but I'm awfully glad that it did. Well, here's the kind of work we did, and it helped, and you can sort of answer this question if somebody asks you the question. What did you do in the Army, Grandpa? Well, not much, just drove the guys to work. Well, that's true, but we didn't just drive them to work. Later on, we might bring some other guys to join them doing their work. And not too soon after that, we would be bringing in more ammunition, food, water, and taking out wounded people. And later on, we'd be coming in, bringing even more firepower to help them. And then we'd also begin taking out body bags. And so we didn't just drive them to work. We were with them to take care of all their needs the best we could. So when you have a combat assault, everybody has to get ready, has to get fueled up. Well, here's a picture of a bunch of my colleagues in the 2nd platoon. One of these fellows was an ex-Navy pilot, a Marine pilot, who was a major and joined us as a warrant officer. This young man became a friend of mine and later died after I left in country. This fellow and I had an adventure with an auto-rotation on the failure of our power systems. And this was my roommate from Vietnam, plus a classmate in flight school. So people we knew, people we didn't know, but people with whom we did some important work. Well, now if you fuel up your crew, you got to fuel up your aircraft. And this just happens to be a picture of all these Thunderbirds on the front of these aircraft. So we know that that's the 118th. We don't know who this is, but it was probably somebody out of the 145th Aviation Battalion, because we were all based somewhere near Saigon. We also made the papers, Stars and Stripes. It's a picture of a pretty unorganized departure, gaining our position back up into the organized flight formation. This image here is, you'll see that you can see right through the plane of the main rotor blades. And that's because my eyeball and that plane are exactly in line with each other. And that's what we did. We flew so that we would be higher than the plane that we were related to in the formation, because then we knew that we weren't going to have any difficulties because we had that height advantage over them. Later on, of course, as we got closer to the ground, we slipped further to the sides, and there was no more overlapping of the rotor blades. Now, here's an example taken of some D models later on, but it's the best picture I can show you. See, this would have been Alpha 1, this would have been Alpha 2, this would have been Alpha 3, back here would have been Alpha 4, and then this is Alpha 5. Behind them would have been Bravo 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But this is an example of a flight as we're en route to a landing zone. And here's another picture, different landing zone. Actually, these were not the same flight. But here we are lining up to work into the area. And lots of times smoke would be used to help identify for our lead aircraft where it was in the field that they should try to come up to so that we could have the best opportunity for all the rest of the aircraft to fit into that landing zone. And here you get down a little bit lower and you begin to see, in this particular case, there's troops already on the ground and we're moving in, and this is kind of like an exciting, I like this altitude, to tell you the truth. And then here is an example of what happens when the ground troops, rather than going to their left or to their right towards the tree lines and such, they were going straight ahead, and that put them in jeopardy because of these aircraft were coming in their formation, and all of a sudden you got down on the ground, you got troops, and then you do a dance. I've done more than one dance, and I don't need that picture anymore. Well, here's a young man sitting in a 2nd platoon, 118th guy, and here's probably the captain who was the leader of the assistance group, the advisors, because this, in a period of time, 64 to 65, all the other Americans were advisors or special forces. And so here is us taking off after having dropped off some people with the idea of getting back into the formation so that we could come back and take care of them. Well, here is a picture that is my favorite picture of all of them because, oops, excuse me, because one, you can tell it was our aircraft, and I don't know when or where this was, because I'm not sure whether this fellow is a Caucasian or whether he's Vietnamese, but this guy, I do know that he's a crew chief, and he's the crew chief on this aircraft because crew chiefs were always on the left-hand side in the back in our company, and he's got a rifle, plus he's got an M60 machine gun. On this side is an M60 machine gun that the gunner has, and he's still sitting in the seat, prepared or doing whatever he's going to do. This guy is wearing what's called a monkey belt. And the monkey belt is connected into one of the rings inside the aircraft, and it's long and allows you to get outside the body of the aircraft so that you can look further to the rear and you can obviously see well at the front. So he's one of the men in the doorway, crew chiefs or gunners. And this is a gunner platoon from the 25th Infantry who were with us for a period of time. One of these young men was killed later on after I was gone. And here is a gunner sitting, the door gunner from the 25th with his M60 and his ammunition free to operate. Some guys like to use the mounted ones, some guys would unmount them and use them because they had felt they could cover a larger field of fire. This young man was Dick Cassiope. He was a military academy graduate and the leader of the platoon of the individuals that you just saw. He and I became good friends, and I may have a chance to tell a little story about him a little bit later. Here's one of his people in the shotgun platoon. Of course, that puts him on the right-hand side of the aircraft, and this is his weapon. It doesn't look like it unless you do it close up. And this is the crew chief. That's the other half. You got a gunner and you got a crew chief. Here's another crew chief. And here's the best crew chief around, probably ever in the Army. No, I don't want to make that sound like, somebody's being disparaged. But he was such a great guy. He knew his stuff, and we've been friends ever since. And here is a poem written by a Marine who had 25 months worth of touring in Vietnam, and it's dedicated to the helicopter crews there. And I think because as pilots, we sat up in the front, we didn't see what the heck was going on back there. And this guy writes about what it's like to be on the ground and dealing with getting in and out of the helicopters and such. They came in low and hot and close to the trees, dropped their tail in a flare, rocked forward, and we raced for the open doorways. This was always the worst for us. We couldn't hear anything, and our backs were turned to the tree line where the bad guys are. The best you could hope for was a sign on the face of the man in the doorway, leaning out, waiting to help with a tug, pull you in, or to lay down some lead. Sometimes you could glance quickly at his face and pick up a clue as to what was about to happen. We would pitch ourselves in head first, tumble against that scuff-riveted aluminum floor, grab for a handhold, and will that son of a bitch up into the air. Sometimes the deck was slick with blood, or worse. Sometimes there were things left in the shadows under the web seats, and sometimes they landed in the shallow river to wash them out. Sometimes they were late, sometimes they were parked in another LZ with their rotors turning a lazy arc, a ghost crew strapped in once too often, motionless, waiting for their own lift, their own bags, once too often in the margins. The getting on and getting off were the worst for us, but this was all he knew, the man in the doorway. He was always standing there in the noise, watching, urging, swinging out his gun, grabbing the black plastic and heaving, leaning out and spitting the taste away as though it would go away. They came in low and hot, close to the trees, dropped their tail in a flare, rocked forward, and began to kick the boxes out, bouncing against the skids, piling up on each other, water, food, bullets, 1,000 pounds of C's, warm water and rounds, 7.62, half a ton of life and death. And when the deck was clear, they would pile the bags, swing them against their weight, and throw them through the doorway, his doorway, onto his deck, and nod, and he'd speak into that little mic, and they'd go nose down and lift with their last flight, their last extraction. Sometimes he'd raise a thumb, or perhaps a fist, or sometimes just a sly, knowing smile, knowing we were staying and he was going, but also knowing he'd be back in a blink, standing in the swirling noise in the rotor wash, back to let us rush through his door and skid across the deck and will that son of a bitch into the air. They came in low and hot, close to the trees, and dropped their tail in a flare, rocked forward, kicked out the boxes, and slipped the litter across the deck. Sometimes he'd lead down and hold the IV and brush the dirt off a bloodless face, or hold back the flailing arms and the tears. A thumbs up to the right seat, and you'd only be minutes away from the white sheets, the saws, and the plasma. He came in low and hot, close to the trees, dropped their tail in a flare and rocked forward, and we'd never hear that sound again without feeling our stomachs go just a bit weightless, listen just a bit closer to the gunfire, and look up for the man in the doorway. Well, there was psychological warfare. There were speakers on the side of our aircraft, and there would be a Vietnamese officer in there blaring out whatever the message was to the enemy and to the friendlies on the floor, on the ground, telling them what might be happening and what they should do. We also threw out tons and tons of these kinds of leaflets and giving them information about how they could turn in their weapons and be taken care of, and they wouldn't have to continue fighting this war. This is Black Virgin Mountain, called Tay Ninh Mountain, Nui Ba Din. It's a 3,000-foot tall mountain. It's been fought over every war that's ever taken place in that part of the territory. And my roommate and I, Christensen, I called him Chris Christensen, he and I were flying that day, and we made 10 flights to the top of the mountain. And on the 11th one, we lost power, and Chris was, it was his turn to fly to the top, and we ended up going into some clouds, hitting a tree, got down on the ground, and the damn thing kept rolling. And when it stopped, this is what it looked like. Chris was in this seat, I was in the left seat. There were three following day. Our crew chief, who was wearing one of those monkey belts, because of the monkey belt, he was allowed to be outside of the aircraft, and as it rolled down the hill, he was crushed to death. Several crushes, one death. I ended up broken arm, with some cuts and bruises on the face, concussion, had some amnesia, spent some time dealing with that. And 2 months later, I was able to be back on flight status, and John Daly was a friend of mine. He was our check ride guy, and so he put me back together for purposes of doing any flying. And here was an adventure. Tommy Elliott, about the tallest helicopter pilot I think there ever was, he and I were supporting a special forces camp. This isn't the camp, but this is what it looked like. And we lost control over the engine and put it into auto rotation so that we could put it safely down on the ground. And I was flying. It was my turn to fly. And so first I was planning on putting us on one of the roads. And then I realized because we were going so slowly with our airspeed that we didn't have the usual flight angle. And I was going to land on that stupid bridge. And so I changed to go back towards the inside of the compound. But then what I realized was that there's mines out there and there's other nasty things. And so I decided to try to carry it all the way to the berm so that we would not land outside the protection of the walls. And so this is what we ended up with. When we hit pretty hard, and because the blades didn't have a high RPM, it had lower RPM, the centrifugal force didn't keep it straight, and so when it came around, it hit the berm and made it look pretty much unserviceable. Here's Harold and I getting ready to go on standby. Standby, we had an aircraft, a slick, and we had a bandit, an arm ship, and we slept outside the aircraft at the flight line in our uniforms, and all we had to do is slip our boots on, zip them up, run out into the aircraft, and so that we could get in the air in 3 minutes. That was the mission. Well, one night, an Air Force aircraft, an F-102, flamed out, and the pilot ejected when he was about 12 miles out of Saigon's airport. And so we were put into the air at night, and the bad news is you don't fly low level at night anywhere over that's the jungle or anything similar to that. And so we were out there with both of our searchlights on, the one that was fixed and the one that you can move around. And as it turned out, Chris spotted the guy, and because he jumped out onto the roadway, the road that we were following, and we put him on the ground, and the pilot jumped into the aircraft. Well, 3 days later, his flight invited our whole crew down to the Air Force O Club so that we could have a good time. Well, when we got there, the pilot who had bailed out that we rescued, he was not there. He was on R&R, but they did give us some really nice booze. Let's take a look and see if you can see this. Okay, it was King's Ransom, Scotch whiskey, sounding the word around the world, and it's U.S. Navy property. Well, here's what we found out later. We didn't know him then, but years later, I went searching. We were in Washington, D.C., and I went into a military facility that the Air Force had and asked them about helping me find somebody who had to get out of his aircraft on November 27th. in 1964, and it turned out the lady who I was talking to had a husband who was in that same unit, but they were in Thailand, and she thought she could find me a documentation. Well, anyway, she did, and this is a picture of it. The recovery of Lieutenant Gordon presented problems of search and rescue and survival which had not previously been considered by the squadron pilots. He ejected close to a friendly camp of Viet Marines, however, not speaking Vietnamese. He thought they might be unfriendly Kong, and so he tried to evade. Recovery was made difficult due to his leaving the area of ejection and his lack of personal survival equipment. It took approximately 2 hours to locate the recovery during the incident. So we finally found out who he was, and I've talked to him, sent some letters and things like that. There was another rescue that we did, and that was one of my classmates and I were doing a routine flight, and we got a radio message to any aircraft who can hear me that we're being attacked from the north, and we need to get our women and children out of this little village. And so we were close by, and we picked up on it. We knew where they were. We went in and picked out 17 children and women into our aircraft, and I had a hell of a time getting it going because it was so darn heavy, and we had to fly with the wind at our tail because you couldn't go to the other direction because that's where the bad guys were shooting at us from. But we made it and got out of there. So the Benoit Air Base got mortared November 1st, 64, night attack. They had launched a 30-minute barrage, and they destroyed or damaged 18 B-57s, 6 A-1Hs from Second World War fighter bombers, and 4 Air Force 2 double main rotor bladed rescue and helicopters for fighting fires on crashes, and a couple of C-47s. One of the young men at work, who was part of the aviation company, was on guard duty, and actually in the early evening saw what he thought were members of our own reconnaissance out there checking the perimeter. And to this day, he still says, God, if I hadn't made that judgment, I would have called, and we might have found out that the guys that he saw was part of the mortar attack bunch. And then there was a Silver Star awarded to one of the pilots, and a Distinguished Flying Cross to another one. This fellow happened to jump up onto one of these A-1H types that had crashed on landing, and he went out and pulled the guy out of the aircraft before it blew up. The Silver Star came from leadership and other kinds of things. Well, there's always Christmas during wartime, and so here's me, here's Harold, and here's Rich celebrating. And then here's Bob Hope to see him. But as it turned out, we had a mission early that morning, and when I came back hoping to get something to eat and then to come see the show, I got assigned along some other guys around. Now this is a story you can check if you're interested. We had L-19s flying forward air control and other kinds of observation, and one of the fellas, Danny Dawson, crashed, and several months later, and they never found him. Several months later, his younger brother, Don, came to the country to spend time trying to find him. And Life magazine covered it March 12, 1965. And then this is the rest of the story, which was in the same magazine on October 8th, 1965. It doesn't have a happy ending, but it's quite an interesting story because we did a lot of flying in support of them. Now, if you're going to go to war, you got to have some time off, and so here's one of the villas that we had available to us. Here's the beach. We had a available to us. Here was Eubanks, the DFC guy. This fellow, Jack Island, caught me one time in the very first week or two that I was in country, because I was walking down the flight line with my chin strap on, my helmet unsnapped. And of course, when you're a junior warrant officer and he's a senior captain, you know, he's looking for somebody to straighten up. And he said, "Damn it, McLarney, if you're wearing that helmet, you keep it snapped up. I don't care where you are." And well, as a matter of fact, the helmet that I was wearing when we had that crash and rolled down the mountain, that son of a gun was completely still strapped on, and the rest of it was just smashed to hell. Anyway, so I owe him something. Really good food there. This is a Vietnamese gentleman and his wife had this Italian restaurant there, and we looked forward to being there. This is money that you need when you're on R&R, and this is a nice American girl that you want to meet when you go to Hong Kong. And her grandfather owned a medical supply company that was based in Portland, Oregon, and of course I was second grade through college living in Portland, Oregon. Small world. Here's Rich and I having something at a hotel in Hong Kong. Well, this is what I look like after getting back online, and I just wanted to, this is sort of what happens to you when you get 849 hours, you know, during 9 months of flying, which is what I did. 475 missions according to our records, and during that 11 months that I was there, 2 of those months, you know, I wasn't flying. I had an air medal with 18 Oak Leaf customers, and we'd always try to figure out exactly what was a mission. Some people have ideas, and not everybody has the same idea. That much I know for sure. So here's Dong's Y. This was a major battle. The only reason I was going to share this with you was that this particular helicopter had this pilot in it, and this was Don Sagert, and he and I would become friends. He and I were shot down, as a matter of fact, earlier in our relationship, and he ended up dying in that crash in this battle. And this is where this is the memorial. His body and all the bodies in that aircraft have never been returned. This is an aircraft dedicated to the entire group of people who were in that aircraft that was lost, and it's in a VFW in South Carolina, where I cannot remember what the location is. Well, here, when you go back to the Vietnam Memorial, this is the statue for the nurses, the statues for the troops. And this is a placement of a memorial to all the crew members, pilots and gunners and crew chiefs. And in the war, there were 11,835 specific tail numbers that were registered that we know about. And 5,600 of those helicopters were either completely destroyed or otherwise lost. And at the same time, 2,165 pilots and aircraft commanders died, and 2,715 crew chiefs and gunners died. And that's 4,877. So we definitely know that freedom is not free. And here's the wall. This picture was taken by Frank Zipperer. He and I flew a lot together. In fact, we got shot up, not shot down. We got shot up together at a period of time. And I imagine that anybody who hasn't been there should really make it there, because it's a pretty important place. Now here's what Ronald Reagan had to say. Now he actually was in the service. I have it on good authority that he enlisted as an he enlisted in the reserves as an enlisted man in 1937. So he had the right idea about service in the country. And then later was able to go to active duty in 42, and in 45 he got out as a captain, and he was always in the U.S. because he had horrible eyesight, 6/, you know, you and I would like to be 20/20. He was 6/200 in both eyes. You know, there's nothing he could see without massive lenses. Later on, of course, cataract surgery and new things were possible. So when you read it, it's freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We don't pass it on to our children in our blood. It must be fought for, protected, handed to them by our example, or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States when men were free. The mission that we have, living history, is 1,000% connected to that vision. That's the end of my presentation.
Outstanding.
How did I do on time?
Dave. Excellent.
Very good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for a great presentation. Do we have any questions? Is everybody on mute?
Hey Pat, so you were there before American troops came into country. You know, Ronnie could speak of the first Cav and their first major mission. But that was 65. You were there in 64, right?
64, June of 64 to May of 65. I flew out over ships that were bringing in American troops and equipment. So yeah, I was. I got out of there before the good guys really showed up.
Yeah, no kidding. So you were really one of the first.
But we got to do everything. We didn't have specialized aviation units. I mean, if it was a helicopter, we could do whatever we had to do with it and other things. So that was actually pleasing. I mean, the rescue that we did with the 17 women and children, that would not have been possible if we had dust off from people who were keyed and ready to go to get people out of trouble.
Yeah, MacV was really they were just advisors there basically, and then you had a helicopter unit that would transport the ARVN, right? That was
right. Yeah. We did a lot of work with Special Forces. In fact, I got a pin from a Special Forces guy one time because wherever he was, he had lots of opportunity to ride helicopters just in time. So he was, and I saw my hat. I wear it to reflect my recognition of what they went through and how we helped them.
Where was MacV located at that time?
Yeah, as far as I thought it was in Saigon, but I don't know where in Saigon.
Is it in Saigon or up at Tan Son Nhut?
No, I thought it was in Saigon, but Tan Son Nhut and Saigon are, they're connected.
And the Benoit Air Base was right there at Tan Son Nhut, right?
Yeah, we were 15 miles away.
Hey, Pat, this is you.
I want to thank you, Pat, for taking care of our enlisted people. The crew chiefs in the back, you gave recognition to them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The North Vietnamese were ruthless. You are correct. I've seen them kill women and children in Massachusetts Striker.
And nothing's changed for them.
Yeah.
Once we left behind, that's right.
Hey, Pat, this is Jim. Because you were an early enabler, in other words, you were one of the very first aviation units over there. I came 4 years later, but we absolutely changed our tactics a little bit because of what you guys went through. So the learning curve, you started it, and then it transcended back to flight school. So you guys probably came back and started teaching us, you know, at a later date. But obviously, depending on the corps that you were in, like I was up in 2 Corps, so we were more Central Highlands and mountains. But and there's Sven, and he'll probably attest to this, but the tactics had to change a little bit according to the mission, obviously. So we couldn't just do a textbook type operation based on what the Army called air mobile, and you know, that actually changed as time went on. We just said, that's not working very well, so we had to start changing some things. But thanks to you, kudos, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was fun.
Absolutely.
Pat, I flew off Huey, flew up there and back. And
Oh, yeah.
Got it. A real exciting trip. Leaving Huey, the pilot would lift the helicopter off and then get to the edge and then dive bomb to get speed. And oh my God, that was, you just point that plane to the bottom and away we'd go.
Well, it kind of depended on the prevailing winds whether that was a good idea or not.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with Nui Ba Dan and Nui Ba Ra. Do you remember Nui Ba Ra?
No.
Well, that was the other mountain. They called them mountains because it was all flat around there, right?
Yeah, right.
You know, it was pretty flat. But, yeah, Nui Ba Dan was north of, closer to Tainan, right? In that area?
Yeah, right next to Tainan.
Yeah.
In fact, the airstrip at Tainan is what we used to, to fuel up, and that's where we went back and picked up troops and stuff.
Did you see that Buddhist temple?
The Haidao temple? Yeah. Yeah, those people suffered.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
They did.
The ruthlessness showed up on the part.
Pat, now your aircraft, you had B model gunships, right?
Yes, we did.
And did you have D model slicks?
They came right after I left.
So you're still flying B models? You did?
Yeah, we kept doing, from what I understand, at least another year before our B model gunships were replaced with any other kind of gunship.
Right.
Doug Wilson, do you remember the Taodai Temple in Tainan?
Yeah, that's what he was saying. He went to that.
Yeah.
Doug Wilson was there just in 2000.
Oh, okay.
Who was there?
Doug Wilson.
Oh, yeah?
He's a crew chief. Spent 2 tours in Vietnam. He's a crew chief with the 101st.
Yeah, I went by that temple. I never went in it. But we went right by there.
You had to take your boots off and lay your weapons at the gate, at the door, before you could go in. So I never went in.
Yeah.
I never did either.
Well, it was a long time before I ever took my flak jacket off after we landed someplace. I didn't want to get shot in the chest.
Yeah.
Yep.
So did they have the, were you dealing with the Viet Cong quite a bit in '64? And was the NVA coming down quite a bit?
No, I don't remember any action that I was part of where the enemy was comprised of our RVNs, or they're the North Vietnamese. It was all Viet Cong.
Viet Cong, that's what I was thinking.
Viet Cong, but there could have been others. I mean, there's leadership from organized military. It was helping them just like we were having organized leadership, with the.
I wonder if the Russians were involved.
They were.
Yeah, as advisors, yeah.
Yeah.
And the Chinese and the Cubans.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, definitely Chinese.
Yep.
Well, we had the Koreans and the Australians and the Thais, and there was about 7 countries that were lined up with us.
Pat, the picture of the Special Forces camp that you have in the star-shaped form,
Right.
I spent 3 months trying to build one of those things, and one of our members, Bob McLean, he took over, commanded that later on with a whole group of Special Forces troops.
Huh.
Oh, I'd sure like to have that picture.
Oh, yeah, I can take care of that for you.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
I'm sure Bob would like that too.
Yeah,
You should send it to him, Tim,
yeah,
when you get it. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I wish I could remember where that was, because I think there must have been about 8 of them that we used to go in and out of, and that's the only picture that I found that had everything in it. You know, you could see all the star shapes, and you could kind of imagine the trails and the trenches and the punji sticks and where the claymores were and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for that presentation. That Rob had a few flashbacks. But I'm going to drop off, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, Al.
Scott, we'll see you later.
Thanks, Al.
Take care.
Thanks, Al.
Aloha.
Pat,
Right, if there are no more questions,
I don't have any.
all right. Thank you, Pat, for a great presentation. I look forward to the time we can get back into schools and get back into our regular meetings, but this was an excellent presentation. And this will go up to our website within this next week. So
I'll be
thank you, Gary.
I'll be interested to see how my purple arrowhead looks.
it'll look good.
Okay, I'm gonna leave you guys. And no, wait a minute, there's more business.
You can stick around. We'll do a quick.
Yeah, no, I'm sticking.
All right. So, Kirk, are you ready for our financial report, which basically is covered as kind of bare on monthly changes to finance?